today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about, believe it or not, your family is actually a business. You see, every family has inputs, that's money, time, and energy. Every family is a business. Whether you have a separate business or not, every family is a business. A sense that your children will have choices that you did not. Then you need to understand these terms because it is unlikely, especially in today's world and today's economy, that you will dumb luck your way through this forever and ever and ever. You got to own these terms. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And I'm here to tell you that every family is a business. And I'm telling you this because 76% of all marriages fight about money of all things, right? Money, which when you die, you're not going to say, I wish I'd made more money. You're going to say, I wish I'd spent more time with my partner. I wish we'd focused on our kids more. And yet, 76% of all marriages fight about money. And so I want to put a reframe. I've been dying to do this episode for a while. I want to put a reframe on money and family as a business. And the funny thing is, even as I say that family is a business, I find myself thinking, well, isn't that all about money? And in a way it is, and in a way it isn't. And truthfully, this is something I have wrestled with in my own life walk myself. The idea that it's okay to thrive, but to be very careful about what the definition of thriving is. The reason why 76% of all marriages fight about money, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the big picture reason is there's a misunderstanding about what money represents. And we've talked in this series on prosperous partnerships about the current of our culture. The current of our culture is materialism, and money is a big part of materialism. And then there's the current of our partnership, which is about love. The current of our partnership, which is about closeness and unity and shared vision. Now, let me kick this off by saying, as a business owner, right, and someone who's owned multiple businesses, you can partially measure the success of the business by the finances of it. But a business that focuses only on finance inevitably dissolves. Whether a business is profitable financially is very much a measure of whether it's profitable culturally, whether it's profitable in hitting its goals, whether it's profitable in the values that it's instilling in the employees, whether it's profitable in the shared vision and the experience, and whether each individual player feels that they are fulfilled and growing within the business. And the reason for that is that's what we're wired for. That's what families are wired for all of us to feel fulfilled and growing in the business of family. And that's why I'm here to tell you, in this episode, we're going to explore why every family is a business. I don't want my marriage to feel like a business, says Gwen. We're supposed to love each other, not run meetings. But lately, it feels like I'm managing everything and resenting it. Why does naming structure feel so uncomfortable and yet so necessary? Now, I want to be really clear. Brad and Gwen have a business together, and they have the business of family. And those are separate things, but they tend to melt into one another. So what Gwen is talking about is, because they haven't clearly named the structure of their family business and the structure of the business that their family is engaged in separately, they're kind of melting in together. It's kind of fuzzy. And consequently, Brad and Gwen have been having a lot of fights. There's a resistance to structure. And the basis of that resistance is a fear of losing romance. Let me give you a really clear-cut example. The famous coach Tony Robbins was once known to say that he and his partner scheduled their intimate times together. Now, that doesn't sound very romantic. And Tony was really clear that because his life was so full, he and his partner's life was so full and so rich, they were both so busy growing as individuals that they needed to schedule time for their relationship. And one of the ways they scheduled time was their intimate time together. Now, we don't know what that means, really. It could mean sex. It could just mean that they spent time having pillow talk together. We don't really know. Nobody asked Tony this. I think when he said this, so many people were shocked. But what we can all glean from this is that when we are fully engaged as human beings in growing our work, growing ourselves through our work, growing our children, growing our household, growing our relationship, we need to make sure that there's structure that covers all of these things. And a lot of times when people come to me with parallel lives, it's because they have not created that structure. And if you are not only in the business of family, but in a family business together, that's double indemnity, double trouble. What happens when we don't have structure is emotional labor accumulates without ownership. We did a bunch of episodes on man keeping, all right? Men generally are less aware of the emotional labor, and so the burden starts to fall on the Gwen in the relationship because the Brad is all about hitting the goal and getting things done and forgets the emotional component, the being part. And then what happens is we ask our partner to compensate for these inadequacies because we love each other. Oh, honey, it's just going to be just be patient with me while I just go through this small change because you love me. Instead of really talking through the small change, what's the impact of the small change? What's it going to be on the family? What's it going to be on the business? What's going to be on the ecology of our lives? It's just like, hey, you love me, so just figure it out. So let's talk more about Brad and Gwen. Brad and Gwen never talked about leadership or ownership at home or in the business. They just let's set aside their business for a second. You know what? You remember what happened when you first had kids? Some of you who first had kids, you were just like trying hard to keep the ball in the air. You're not getting enough sleep. Maybe you've read all the books, but still your child hasn't read all the books. And so maybe you had twins and you're doubly overwhelmed. The two of you are just struggling to keep all the balls in the air. You're trying to make sure there's enough money to put food on the table. You're trying to get enough rest to do these things. You're trying to take care of your child while you're doing all this. All right. There's no named leadership. It's just assumed. You just immediately go to where your strengths are. But that's not true leadership. That's just, oh, I'm stronger at this, so I'm going to do it. But it's not. Leadership is ownership. I'm going to own this because I'm stronger in it, as opposed to I'm going to do this because I'm stronger in it. Well, Brad and Gwen never talked about leadership at home or in the business because they were full on growing their business, growing their family, growing their lives. And they just assumed because they love each other, and Brad and Gwen loved each other madly, that love would take them through it, maybe even me. And they made a lot of decisions individually that should have been talked about as a couple. They made a lot of decisions about money. That was a decision that was renegotiated. Anyway, I was saying, decisions about money were just made in the moment. Bills need to be paid, they paid them. They didn't talk about prioritizing them. And then all of a sudden they'd find out that they didn't have any money to pay things that really needed to be paid up front because they weren't prioritizing, they weren't thinking it through. Schedules weren't really thought through. Staffing at work, not really well at work, better than at home. But even so, the staffing situation at work would be, oh my God, we really need someone to do this. And then they would hire someone and maybe they wouldn't be the best fit. And they were having the same experience at home too. We really need someone to clean the house, and then something would go missing because maybe they didn't vet the person as carefully as they should. Parenting, they're having trouble really showing up for their kids. Their child was getting sick all the time. They didn't understand why. And it wasn't just childcare. They hadn't really thought about their long-term priorities, and so they hadn't really structured their short-term priorities. And so what was happening was money was going out faster than it was coming in. And because money was going out faster than it was coming in, it was stressing them. And because they weren't making the changes they need, they weren't prioritizing, they weren't figuring out the schedules, they weren't managing costs in the business or at home, things got really out of control for them. And I'm wondering, as I'm saying this, how many of you are having this experience without having a business? Maybe you're in a job and you're just feeling like you're out of control. You're feeling like you're living hand to mouth. You're feeling, I'm reading all the time about how people feel that they're just not earning enough money. Well, part of that is that money isn't worth what it was. Part of that is also maybe we're spending more than we should, or not that we could, but then we should. Maybe we need to be looking at our expenditures and prioritizing more. Gwen felt often like she was the default decider. Brad felt like he was always disappointing her, even though he was doing his best. No matter what he did, it was wrong, even though it seemed like it was the right thing to do. Gwen said, I don't want to be the boss. I don't want to be carrying everything at home alone. And Brad said, I thought we were partners. I didn't realize that silence meant I'd always feel like I was failing. When you ignore the business of family, we ignore the financial side of the family, and we ignore leadership, and we ignore roles, and we ignore tasks as being part of certain jobs or being part of certain roles. When we ignore this and we just try and wing it, we set ourselves up for stress and even failure. In rich relationship, we put this plainly. Families already manage resources, power, and decisions. You're already doing it. Refusing to name those resources, refusing to name the power involved, refusing to make the decisions together consciously doesn't make the need to do that disappear. It just makes everything more chaotic. And that's exactly what Brad and Gwen were experiencing. Because you see, every family has inputs, that's money, time, and energy. Every family has outputs, care, results, stability. Every family has, I'm going to talk business for a second, income. Every family has expenses. From a business point of view, every family has a profit and loss. Is there more coming in than is going out, or is there more going out than coming in? And every family has a balance sheet. And a lot of people in business don't know what a balance sheet is. A balance sheet is the impact, is all the assets and liabilities that you have, and do you have more than you owe? A lot of us turn to credit cards when the stuff hits the fan, when we're having trouble prioritizing, when we're having trouble making decisions together. A lot of us turn to credit cards, and we don't know that our liabilities actually outweigh what we have, the equity in our house, our car, whatever it is, because we don't know the principles, because we don't apply principles of business to our family crumbles. And when that carries over to your business that you have as a family, if you're partners in a business together, it's doubly troubling. You start sucking money out of your business to pay for your family, or you start pulling money out of your family to pay for your business. Either way, you're sunk. And it's because you're not willing to have clear leadership. And clear leadership doesn't mean that there's one person who's in charge, though it can be. What it really means is clear leadership of different areas. In a business, there's a CEO who sees the big picture because that's their strength. There's a COO, the Chief Operations Officer, who makes sure all the details are working. Those are the two main roles. There's a Chief Financial Officer who makes sure that the finances supports the operations and that there's more coming in than there is going out, et cetera, et cetera. You need to decide in your marriage who's going to hold those positions. And in a business, the CEO doesn't make those decisions in a vacuum. The CEO makes big picture decisions with the help of the COO and the CFO. Those are the three key roles that you need to embrace in your family, and maybe you need to embrace them in your business if you don't have them. With that comes accountability. When one person wears the hat, and maybe they make the decision jointly, but that person is responsible for making sure that decision, that promise is fulfilled. When one person says, the buck stops with me, that's when things will change. When structure is absent, emotional labor starts to fill the gap, and the marriage becomes stressed. The partnership, even if you're not married, if you're two partners in a business together, the partnership becomes stressed because, oh, we like each other, we're buddies, but you haven't defined clear structure. Resentment starts to come up, and it becomes almost impossible to approach these things clearly, because once we get angry and resentful, once we feel like our survival is threatened And finances threaten our survival a great deal when there's more going out than there is coming in. We become triggered. 76% of all marriages fight about money. We become triggered, and when we become triggered and activated, being rational is almost impossible. Well, Brad and Gwen named the family system directly. They clarified who decides what. Decisions would be shared versus owned, right? There would be some decisions that Brad would make on his own and Gwen would make on her own. That's sometimes in life as individuals, there are decisions we need to make for ourselves that we know we can't participate in the family system without fulfilling our own growth. They talk about it, hope to get buy-in, but sometimes you make a decision without your partner, and then you hope, against hope, that you're right, because if you make that decision and you step in it and it messes up the family, you're going to have to own that. You might even get an "I told you so." It happens. But that isn't a disaster. It's a learning experience in the partnership. You decide what decisions are shared versus owned, and you decide how emotional labor is supported, not assumed. And guys, we're not talking about, when we talk about emotional labor, we're talking about being emotionally fluent, being able to name emotions, talk about emotions, and take responsibility for the emotions that we're putting out consciously and sometimes unconsciously. When Brad and Gwen did this, and it took some work, they both did a richer relationship breakthrough session. They had some old stuff they needed to let go of. 4 prerequisites to change. 1, let go of the old stuff is the first part. Once you let go of the old stuff, you can create a new strategy with a clean slate. And then there's action, and then there's realignment. The shift was immediate. Gwen said, once it wasn't all on me, I could actually relax. And she was talking about the family and the staff. Brad said, once I knew what I owned, what I was responsible for, I could lead instead of guessing. And honestly, part of that was on Brad. Part of it was he was afraid to take the lead, and he had some stuff to work through regarding the risks of leadership, the risk of making a mistake and failing. And so you see, I'm going to make this point to you again. Every family is a business. Whether you have a separate business or not, every family is a business. And if I was speaking another language to you when I said profit and loss and balance sheet, you got to learn these terms. You have to learn these terms. You do not know. If your goal is to create financial freedom for your family and for your children, I'm not talking about mad Rockefeller money here. I'm talking about a sense that your children will have choices that you did not. Then you need to understand these terms, because it is unlikely, especially in today's world and today's economy, that you will dumb luck your way through this forever and ever and ever. You got to own these terms. And to help you with that, next episode, we're going to help you separate out these concepts, the business of family versus the family business. And for some of you, this is going to be separating out the business of family from your work outside of the family, because the two things overlap and impinge on each other with frequency. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here and you want to hear more, like, subscribe, share this podcast with other people. And in the meantime, have a fantastic day and an amazing tomorrow.